Happy Halloween podcast listeners. This is your old pal Kendall. Earlier this year, Brad Bell and I recorded a pilot episode for a podcast called Sleeping on Sandman, where we were going to review each volume of The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. And it just kind of became clear after we recorded the first episode that we didn't really have time. Neither he nor I really had time. So we did not continue. But as a special Halloween treat, here's that pilot episode. I don't know if we plug anything that's out of date at the end or if we say something about there being more episodes. But no, this is just going to be the pilot episode. We don't have time to do more podcasts because podcasting takes forever. Bum 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 bum. Exit light, enter night. Take my hand. We're off to Never Never Land.
Wakey, wakey, and welcome to the very first episode of Sleeping on Sandman. I'm the real Brad Bell from the Tour of the DC Universe podcast, and joining me today is a good friend, a guy that I've done a lot of podcasting with over the past 3 years. It is Mr. Kendall Halman of the Kendallcast podcast network. Kendall, thank you for doing this collaboration with me.
Oh, of course. I never say no when somebody wants to do a podcast. That's in general, that's the rule.
So that's a good rule to have, especially when you don't have kids. You do have a over eager cat that kind of delayed this show just a little bit. But now that the cat's under control and my mom is watching my two beautiful kids and the wife's at work, perfect time, I think, to launch this podcast. And the premise of this came about, I finally read volume 1 of Sandman, just a trade paperback, Preludes and Nocturnes, that my good friend Joe bought me for my 32nd birthday. I'm 33, by the way, going on 34. And I finally, quarantine, kind of going through a whole bunch of material, decided to pop this bad boy open, posted, hey, Sandman lives up to the hype. Kendall commented, and Kendall, what has been your experience attempting to read Sandman? Because I think we both agreed as big comic nerds, this has been a blind spot for us.
Yeah. So it's a big blind spot. I've got a story though.
Okay, go ahead.
So actually, this is not the first time that I read Preludes and Nocturnes.
How many times?
This is the third time. But the first two were a long time ago. When I got into comics, summer after my senior year of high school, with Civil War, I was a big, what we called back then, we called ourselves Marvel Zombies, even though I didn't like Marvel Zombies specifically, but that was what we called I was a Marvel guy. Almost exclusively. I did read Identity Crisis, but then I started dating a girl who claimed to like DC, and by like DC, I meant she had read Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and Sandman.
Wow. So she read the entire Sandman. Those are like 3 quintessential Vertigo books, right?
Yeah. She had read, I don't know. There's I feel like there was, especially back then, there was like a quality, a type of person who had read like 5 comic books in their life and nothing else, and Sandman was one of them. So I did buy Sandman Volume 1, Watchmen, and Dark Knight Returns actually was another one that she had read. But
those are the heavy hitters, man.
Yeah. And also I ran off to Los Angeles with this girl. That was a whole thing, trying to be a rock star and a nasty relationship. But I did read, I did read at least the first volume, and then there's a volume that's based on A Midsummer Night's Dream that I read later, and something with a drunk Thor. I thought that volume 1 had the drunk Thor in it, but apparently it doesn't, because I read this and I didn't remember anything that happened in it.
Well, that's why we're a perfect time for you to revisit this and for me to visit this material for the first time. I think it's fascinating that this is one of those go-to books that people who say they're comics fans who haven't read near as much as you or I, thousands and thousands of comics over the years, this is one that they have at least dabbled in. You mentioned some of the others like Dark Knight Returns, V for Vendetta. Another big blind spots for me are like Preacher and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. I've never read those two. And I need to fill in those gaps. I think you're reading Preacher now as well.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through the third volume of Preacher, which is really interesting because it's good, but it's really 90s. Like it plays into sort of the shock value gore stuff. And then I've also been slowly but surely working my way through John Constantine Hellblazer.
Oh man, that's a series that's on my list. They just released the omnibus of that, the Garth Ennis omnibus. So.
I just finished Garth Ennis's run, and it's about like 40 issues long or something like that, and there are at least 8 good issues in there. So
at least 8 out of the 40. Okay, I'll be looking forward to that one. But Sleeping on Sandman felt like an appropriate title to me because we have slept on this series, and now I think is a good time for you revisit the beginning, move through the rest of it, and for me experience it for the very first time, because you have the audio drama coming out on Audible right now, and you also have the Netflix series in the works. And Neil Gaiman, I read a couple interviews he did regarding a Netflix series after I've been researching some of this Sandman stuff. It's basically going to be, it sounds like what the HBO Watchmen show was. What would Watchmen look like in 2019, whatever year, this comes out, Sandman, would Sandman look like in 2022 as opposed to 1987 to 1993? Yeah,
it's crazy that Sandman hasn't, in all this time of comic book adaptations, that Sandman hasn't had like a real high end either TV show or movie already out.
Yeah, I agree. But it's on the way for sure. There's no way that Hollywood is going to miss this opportunity to capitalize on such a beloved property, especially as they mine through a lot of the superhero content and they're getting to some of the stuff like The Boys and whatnot. Yeah, they've already done Preacher. But why do you think this has been the case for you that you miss Sandman, despite being this big comic nerd?
So for me, the first thing is there's a lot to read. Like there's always going to be gaps. I think. And then sort of related to that is, I talked about those very small number of quote unquote essential, especially from back in like 2006 or whatever. There was a small number of essential trades or whatever that everybody, and I read the first volume of Sandman because everybody was saying it was the greatest thing ever. I was a little bit underwhelmed back in the day. And so I just didn't really make it a priority. I also there's something to like, I think a lot of people who are like, oh, I only read graphic novels. This sort of has that, a little bit of that to it. Like, even though this was an ongoing comic book series,
that's what I was about to say. It was released in single issues, correct? To my knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. It definitely was. It was. I mean, it was an ongoing comic book series. Like, the only reason it's considered a graphic novel is because that made people sound more snooty. I don't know. I'm a little bit of a contrarian, and so back in the day. It was just a matter of not getting to it. Also, it's 12 volumes, which there's a lot of essential graphic novels that are 1 or 2 volumes. And I think that's a factor as well.
It's daunting too because there's many different versions. You have the omnibuses, the absolutes, you have the Death miniseries, and there's been some newer Sandman material. But for the purposes of this podcast, begin dropping these Halloween 2020 and go through. The goal is to go through Halloween 2021, cover a volume per month, and then the Death volume that stands on its own, but of course is related to Sandman. We'll see if that happens. I do really want to work through this series, though, because I'm like you as far as, I don't know if I'm a contrarian as much as you, but when something is this hype, this well received, especially when it kind of transcends this comic geek culture that has permeated pop culture now, it's really like a, okay, prove it to me type of attitude. Right, and I know that's not the best attitude to have when viewing art, movies, TV, or whatever. And that's how I went into this. And I finally pulled it off my shelf after a year and a half. And at least for me, as we begin to get into this series and this podcast, I thought it lived up to the hype as you went through this and you revisited it, because this is kind of like, I say revisit, but you said you couldn't remember what you read. So it's almost like you're reading it for the first time. How do you think upon first reading, or third for you, that does it live up to the hype, Kendall?
So first of all, I've really worked hard in the last few years to judge things kind of outside of the hype. Like, if somebody tells me that something is overrated, I'm like, that's not relevant, because I think everyone's wrong about everything. So, everything that people like is overrated, even if I love it. So that's, kind of, it's a matter of, is this good or not? I also think that it helped that over the last few years, I think some of these like, especially like the 80s Vertigo titles have not, like, people have kind of, I don't want to say they've totally forgotten about them, because people still remember Neil Gaiman's Sandman, but at the same time, it's like, if somebody walked into a comic book shop and said, I've never read a comic book before, there was a time when somebody would say, you've got to read Sandman. But now it's more like somebody walks in and says, I've never read a comic book before. And then they're like, okay, well, what TV shows do you watch on AMC? And they'll give you the adaptation of that exactly. TV show or something.
Do you like the DC CW, the Arrowverse?
Right,
and we'll go from there. What's your favorite MCU film? And we'll go from there.
Right.
It's crazy, because as those big two heroes, Marvel and DC, have become mainstream pop culture at this point, these haven't really permeated pop culture to that effect. I feel like, even though there's been a Preacher show, we've already said there hasn't been a Sandman show. Something like Lock and Key is another series I want to read, which is a newer IDW series, but that just got a Netflix show. It took a while for that to happen after that Joe Hill series has been out. So this almost kind of reminds you of being a geek in 2007, as, yes, this is something that everybody used to talk about, but they're not talking about it until the TV show comes out, I feel like, or the audio drama.
Right,
so maybe we're starting the trend of everybody talking about Sandman once again. We'll see. But let's kind of talk about the premise of this series. And it's a hard premise, I think, to sell to someone. You almost got to dive into the material head first and see if it's for you or not. Because my friend, good friend Joe, who got me into comic books, and Jerry Reed, who co-hosts many podcasts with me, have been trying to get me to read this material for years. And okay, it revolves around this character Morpheus, aka Dream, aka Sandman, and that's pretty much all they tell me. And then there's like there's death in there, and there's all this stuff, and it's a story about stories. I'm like, not the greatest sell to me, but it is kind of one of those, I hate to sound cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. One of the things you really have to experience for yourself to appreciate Sandman, I believe.
Yeah, I think that the way that I would sell it is it's a book about fantasy and mythology that features a godlike being who is the sort of the named Dream or Morpheus, he's the sort of god of sleep. And then I would also sell it by saying it's weird in the best ways, and has some really interesting takes on mythological figures and I guess the stories thing. People always talk about its connection with Shakespeare, but that's something that I would have to get a little bit more in depth on it. But I mean, yeah, it's a thing. And then also you can be like, it's Neil Gaiman. He wrote that one episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah, and he did American Gods, that show. Do you remember that?
Right. Yeah. I didn't see that. He's done a lot of stuff. Like, I think a lot of people have heard of Neil Gaiman.
He did. Well, there's one Batman issue he did. I think What Happened to the Cape Crusader. Yes. He made kind of like What Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, Alan Moore. Neil Gaiman did that for Batman. And I believe Mike Mignola did the art. So that is kind of, besides Sandman, if you're in the big two comics world, that's kind of where people would pull Neil Gaiman's name from. But he is, speaking of gods, he's almost a godlike being within a subset of geek culture, a subset who I have friends who would agree with that, but I've just never really dove into a bunch of his work until now. But upon doing research for this podcast and going back and reading a lot of the stuff for Crisis on Infinite Earths that we're doing for our other podcast, Tour the DC Universe. And they're showing a lot of the Golden Age JSA characters in those tie-ins to Crisis on Infinite Earths. And there is a character, Sandman, on there. And in doing research, Sandman was a Golden Age character that originally appeared in Adventure Comics, Wesley Dodds. That's not who we're dealing with here, is it, Kendall?
You're right. Yeah, it's not. And he doesn't he show up in this run?
I don't know.
As
in the issues that we read, he showed up.
Yeah, in like the first, is that not the person in the first issue who like took up the role of Sandman?
I gotta look. It could be. Maybe I just missed that completely.
I mean, there is like a superhero Sandman that they referenced, like that was around in the 50s.
Okay, well that would be him then. That would be Wesley Dodds. Now, there have been a couple different other versions as I was basically skimming the Wikipedia page before we went live on this. But the book starts out, we're in volume 1, which is Preludes and Nocturnes, with the issue Sleep of the Just. And before we dive into this issue, I think it's worth noting the artists that have worked on these books. And you may have to help me with some of these names, but some you will recognize: Kelly Jones, Chris Bocciolo, Matt Wagner, Michael Allred. These are names within comics today that sounds like a who's who of great comic book artists. But the main artists starting out are Mike Keith, and Mike may have to help me with this name, Kendall. Drigenberg, is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know. I really don't. Unfortunately, I'm bad enough with current artists.
Okay, I think it's Mike Drigenberg. If I'm wrong, feel free to email dcutourpod@gmail.com and let me know if I'm wrong, or hit me up on Twitter at @TheRealBradBell. But those artists really, Gaiman storytelling is very unique, and it has to have the art to complement it without overshadowing it. And this art just pushes the envelope enough. I'm not a artistic person. I'm somebody who would talk about art on the internet rather than producing art. I think you're kind of the same way. So we're not your go-to source for that, but I think it's worth noting the artist that worked on this book. Also featured heavily in this book is the House of Secrets and House of Mystery, which were old school in the Bronze Age horror titles for DC. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And Cain and Abel, of course, from the Bible, but they play a key role as main characters or side characters in this series. Neil Gaiman's Sandman, they were heavy hitters in the Bronze Age House of Secrets and House of Mystery. So just wanted to throw that out there. And as far as the characters we're going to encounter, I feel like we'll just talk about them as we work our way through the discussion of this first trade.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Kendall?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with Sleep of the Just. And I'll be honest, with this issue, it wasn't like my jaw hitting the floor. I wasn't blown away. But what we have here is Sandman, or Morpheus, he finds himself in a predicament where he has been held captive, and he's not the focus of this first issue, is he, Kendall?
No, it's kind of there's like a secret society that has kind of held him captive, and it's giving you the history, and then the kind of what the ramifications of having this having Dream be in captivity for 70 years.
And this is, out of these first couple issues of Gaiman Sandman, I thought it was the least interesting, because what this series will be about, the magic and the emotion behind that magic and the stories, not on full display here. It's more getting us from point A to point B to get this story started, because it is at the end of the story in which Morpheus gains his freedom. Now, this secret society, the father who had captured Morpheus, his son ends up inheriting Morpheus pretty much. I believe he was held captive for about 70 years, and once a week they go down there to try to get Morpheus to wake up, to do something. And I guess Morpheus is just waiting for his right opportunity. And he is Sandman. I know that sounds like the dumbest statement ever on the podcast, but what I mean by that, in the most basic of ways, he has been putting people to sleep, right? And when he has disappeared from the plane of existence, taken off the chessboard, if you will, we have people locked into eternal sleep. And I thought the comic did some interesting things with that in these first couple issues.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is the first. There's a few references to Macbeth throughout this trade. I'm not saying this because I'm a Macbeth expert, but I recognize some stuff in other places, and watched the Patrick Stewart Macbeth movie this morning.
Feel free to bring it up, because I'm not a Shakespeare guy, and you say there's a lot of Shakespeare references here.
Yeah. I'm gonna try throughout this to try to catch the stuff, because I'm the farthest from a Shakespeare expert. First of all, I think that I have a soapbox that I think that kids are taught Shakespeare the worst possible way in school, which is by reading it.
They're plays, right?
Yeah. I mean. Yes. Until until this morning, it's like you read it quietly, which is the worst possible way. The next worst possible way is you read it aloud in class, it's like, it's like seeing a play with the worst possible actors, and then beyond that, like, I watched the Romeo and Juliet Leonardo DiCaprio movie, which
I remember that one.
I don't think Leonardo DiCaprio is a Shakespearean trained actor. I mean, he's especially not back then. But the Patrick Stewart, it was like filmed by the BBC. It was really interesting the way they did it. It was like kind of a very low budget movie. Like they filmed the whole thing in like one of those giant mansions in Great Britain. But you could tell all the people were like doing really good jobs. And it was like, oh, this is why people like Shakespeare. But there is a theme, because the premise of Macbeth is Macbeth is next in line to be king, and he and his wife murder the king, and then they murder a bunch more people, and it's really compelling and interesting. But they're haunted by this. But especially his wife is haunted by this brutal act that they did, where they murdered the king, and they framed these two guys and murdered them, and it's like pretty intense, and they talk about how they're never going to sleep again. And then Lady Macbeth, actually later in the play, it shows that she is sleepwalking and basically reenacting that night over and over and over again. And it's just like very...
Well, thanks for spoiling Macbeth for me. Went 33 years without knowing the ending, and Kendall, you ruined it here.
That's not the ending. That's not the ending. That's like the... That's
Is
like
that a twist, though?
I don't know. I mean, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. It's. I would say that I did not ruin the film or the play.
Are making maybe the thing about having kids read aloud in class as a teacher. Sometimes it is the worst possible way, unless it's on a volunteer basis, because instead of concentrating on the material that you want them to absorb, they're just concentrating on the nerves and surviving getting through that reading without screwing up. So just a little teacher tangent there as we get ready for back to school here soon.
Right. I think, and I think there is value of having kids read Shakespeare aloud, but that shouldn't be the way that they are introduced to Shakespeare, because you have to, with a lot of things with teaching. I'm not a teacher, but I taught guitar lessons, and I had a little bit of background in that. And also, training in the corporate world, is you have to get people to buy into the subject matter. And the way to get to people to buy into Shakespeare is have Captain Picard play Macbeth. Don't have some guy that doesn't want to be here play Macbeth.
Makes total sense. I want to ask you this, because I feel like the book is set up better in issue 2 as far as what it will be like from going from issue to issue. But one of the things that is established is we get to finally see Morpheus fully outfitted in, I won't say in all of his glory, because he doesn't have the mask and that type of stuff yet. What do you think about the aesthetic of this character? Because he really does pop off the page here.
I mean, he works. It's one of these chicken or the egg things, and I think this is why it works so well now. And it didn't. This was one of the reasons it wasn't as great in 2007 or so. He kind of looks like a goth dude from 2007.
You know who he looks like to me, and I may be completely off base here, but he looks like David Bowie playing Snape in the Harry Potter movies.
Okay. Yeah.
I kind of get that vibe.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's kind of what I had in my head, But anyway.
Well, it's a chicken or the egg thing, because characters like that are largely based on this like neo-Gothic aesthetic, with a little bit of punk rock thrown in.
It is interesting, though, to think how this character would be viewed in pop culture in 1989 when this issue came out versus 2007 when you were first reading it versus now in 2020 when we're visiting this comic for this podcast, because I do think it depends on not only the time period you're reading it in, but where you're at in your life. And for you and I, roughly the same age, the goth kind of thing, the goth kid was a very prevalent style choice and identity choice at that time.
Yeah, and I was never cool enough to do that. So,
yeah. Actually, when you go to school to be a teacher, Kendall, one of the terms you learn is masking. It is where a student tries to be completely identified based on what they wear rather than who they are. It was not the best thing that I paid $60,000 for my college education to become a teacher, but I did want to throw that piece of knowledge out there. But I'm good to go on to the next issue and discuss Imperfect Host. To me, this is where the book really takes off, because we go to the House of Mystery. That's where we start out. Cain and Abel. You have Cain giving Abel a gift. It's going to be one of these dragons, as we find out. And it's not just the aesthetic of the book that really takes off, because that was in issue 1. I thought that was really well done. But just this grandiose world that the Sandman takes place in, although it takes place within the broader DC universe, which is something that I didn't realize until I read this for the first time here.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you read Spider-Man, those early issues of Amazing Spider-Man, and they waste no time having Spider-Man team up with the Fantastic Four. It's like this is firmly planted in. I would say what we've seen so far, it's firmly planted in a DC universe. I don't know if it's necessary. I don't know if it's if it's necessarily the DC universe, but it's definitely a universe where Batman and Superman and the Justice League and everything exist.
And I think the thing that really is established as you work your way through this first trade, this first volume, is just how much of a mismatch kind of subgenres or genres this is, because you have a ton of horror elements, you have a ton of fantasy elements, and I think the art and the storytelling really bring those to life in a way, unless you sit down and read the book. And this isn't a read, I don't think. I wouldn't call it a breezy read. You can definitely digest it quickly, but I think to get the most out of it, you almost have to let this material wash over you a bit, especially when you get to some of the heavy hitting stuff with death toward the end of the book.
I think I compared with some other stuff from this era, because like I just, you know, I'm working my way through Constantine Hellblazer, and compared with that, this is at least as far as like wordiness and the style of writing, you do move through these issues relatively quickly. It was actually kind of refreshing at how light a read it was compared to some of that stuff. I'll be interested to see how it goes going on, just because a lot of times when you read 80s comics, it's like they were definitely paid by the word.
Yeah.
And
well,
this is
the Silver Age, like the 70s, especially like into the mid 80s.
Yeah,
is very wordy. Just reading the bunch of I keep saying Identity Crisis on Infinite Earth stuff the past couple months. Holy cow! It takes you forever to get through those issues compared to something like this Sandman volume.
Identity Crisis is kind of wordy too, though, with all the different colored text.
It is, especially for a book of that time period. I would say. Yeah. But if you want to see Identity Crisis stuff, go to the YouTube channel for Tour of the DC Universe. Just how movement is portrayed in these panels. There is something that sticks out to me in particular when he's leaving the house. It's either House of Mystery, House of Secret. I can't remember. But when he's leaving I'll say House of Mystery, and he elevates those pods. I don't know what they are. They almost look like mushroom type things. And he jumps across those to go to the dream world. And you get to the dream world. And this is something I think that in more modern comics kind of you lose, despite how good the art is facial expressions. And especially when you have really stylized characters like you do here in Neil Gaiman's Sandman, a lot of times you lose a lot of the facial expressions that make superior comic arcs stand out. But for example, when the panels where he gets to Dream World and he's greeted by Lucian, who is basically like the groundskeeper of Dream World, and he says, "Hey, things have gone to shit here." And you see that look on his face of just like jaw drop almost and just sadness. I was like, wow, this is something really special, not just from a storytelling perspective, but from a artistic perspective as well. And I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. But what do you think as far as the sittings they go to in this book? What do you think about when he goes to the dream world and sees that things have not been going well since he's been away?
So I mean, it's interesting to me. Something that I kind of feel like it should be worse. Like
really,
I mean, well, the dream world and just other things. Like this is somebody who is fundamentally like a force of the universe, and he's been taken out of the picture for 70 years for really for all of what we would consider like modern society. So it's like you would think, you would like they talk about the people who are sleeping weird and the other damage that was done, but it's like if this guy's sister is death. So he should be almost as important as if we had a world without death. But it's like somehow it's still kind of held together a little bit. I thought it was kind of interesting. And then also, yes, we've moved we moved forward. We jumped forward as a society in those 70 years in a way that was much quicker than than maybe the 70 years before that or the 100 years before that. So I don't know if it's saying something about, modern culture or what, but I don't know. It's weird.
I think his absence is really felt more on a personal level and a character level than it is almost like a cosmic level or a universal level. I take your point there, though, but you do see, especially when we get to the MacGuffins that he has to retrieve, how other people being in possession of those things because of his absence has affected the larger spiritual world around him, I think. So I do think that is kind of handled as we move through the story a little bit better. But I completely see, especially when you reference being the brother, being Death's brother, that it should be on par with that. I don't know. I'm assuming Death's much more powerful as we move throughout the story, but I'm assuming because this is my first time reading this. But we get some classic storytelling structure here. He meets with these three witches, the 3 in 1. They tell him he needs to retrieve these 3 MacGuffins, a bag of sand, his mask, and an amulet, which we see the Justice League International, the JLI, which was what was going on in DC at this time, I guess. They had like these embassies set up across the globe, had been in possession of. So I thought, as unique as this story is still relying on those classic storytelling tropes,
right?
Which it's a story about stories, as so many people like to say. Like Seinfeld's a show about nothing. They like to say Sandman's a story about stories. Go ahead,
so the Weird Sisters is actually also a direct reference to Macbeth. Now,
okay,
they're also kind of the 3 fates, which is mythology, goes beyond that. But they are recurring. They're kind of these. That's one of the themes in Macbeth, is that these 3 sisters show up and they give a prophecy to Macbeth. And they do it once at the beginning. That's sort of like, these are all the awesome things that are going to happen to you. And then you're going to become king. And then in the kind of 2/3 of the way through or so, they actually have, it's very similar to this, where, he asks them each a question, or it's like they give him each an answer. I don't think he actually asks them a question, but they give him each an answer, and then he has a follow up, and they can't follow up. So it's a very similar scene to what you have with Morpheus here.
Yeah, and it's crazy that this is the origin of the Sanderson sisters from Hocus Pocus. I'm just joking there. Another thing before we move on from this issue is it establishes our main antagonist of this story, which is going to be Dr. Destiny, whose mother visits him at no other place than Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane, which, going back to Batman reference there, I have had no experience with this villain besides this story. Have you, Kendall?
No, I haven't.
And I don't know if he has appeared in other previous DC stories or stories after this. He probably has, but he is a pretty wicked villain, which I'm guessing that we're going to have that as a theme throughout this run of Sandman, because you're dealing with death and dream. I mean, you're going to have to really push the envelope when it comes to who will challenge them throughout the course of these stories. Are you ready to move on to the Constantine issue?
Yeah.
Okay, Dream a Little, Dream of Me. And again, we may change the format of the show as it moves through. This is just our first episode, and we thought we'd work through the material here chronologically. First of all, you're reading through Hellblazer. Are you a big Constantine fan in general?
I am. I would say I am now. I not necessarily historically, but I really liked the Constantine TV show. I was able to meet the actor Matt Ryan at a convention.
How was he?
Oh, he's great. He's great and super passionate about his role. I mean, you go to these conventions and the people talk about, obviously they're there to talk about the role that they're famous for or whatever. And so you never know how much is like really, how much is deep, but he was able to answer really deep questions. I did ask him who would win in a fight, him or Keanu Reeves, and he said Keanu Reeves would win in a fight.
He had just watched John Wick 3. He made that statement.
But he's so cool because he's played the character of John Constantine in so many different contexts.
Legends of Tomorrow, the Crisis on Infinite Earths tie-in. He played a major role in that, and then of course it was the short-lived NBC show, which I'm so glad he lived beyond that.
Yeah. I would almost say like. It might if they ever bring it back or give him his own solo series again. I would say it's probably it might even be good that they canceled it when they did, and then if they come back with him because he's gotten so good as the character, it almost he might not have even gotten to where he is with the character. I love him on Legends, but yeah, I'm 85 issues into the run, and this is definitely the John Constantine from the Vertigo book.
Okay.
It feels very like right on the nose. He's a little bit less grumpy, but I think in Sandman, but I think that he's because the book he ages in real time in the book. So like so he's only it started. I think it also started around 1989. So like once he's been doing this, where I'm at in the book's been going on for 7 years or 10 years or something now. So he's a little bit more grumpy, but yeah, it felt this was that character. He references Swamp Thing.
Yeah. The green guy. Yeah, I like that reference.
Which took me a minute, but
So how are you reading Constantine? Are you just doing it on Comixology or what?
Yeah, just on Comixology. There's like a lot of the DC stuff, they've got it all collected in these like 14 issue volumes. And I just started volume. Maybe they're probably not 14 issues. They're probably 8 or 9 issues. I think it varies, but I just started volume a lot, volume 10 or something like that.
Oh wow, yeah, you're really moving through that stuff.
Yeah. I've been working on it for 5 years, so
maybe not. So quickly, let me retract that statement there. You've also aged in real time as John Constantine has, as you've read the issues of that Hellblazer.
Yeah, that's true. I think he references mucous membrane in this, right?
I think he does.
Which was his punk rock band that apparently he played Heard It Through the Grapevine in his punk rock band, which is a little interesting choice.
What you have here essentially in this issue, which is I don't think it's the best issue of this first trade, but I think it may be arguably the most entertaining. What you have here is a buddy cop team up in a way between Sandman, Morpheus, and John Constantine. And I just love everything you get here. And we come to find out that in possession of the bag of sand is a former love, I'll say flame of John Constantine. It didn't seem like it was just a hookup kind of thing. He seemed to have genuine feelings for this lady.
Right.
Who they had done. It was alluded to. I don't know if it was alluded to. It was pretty much flat out stated that they had done drugs and she had some problems with addiction and stuff. So they go to retrieve the sand from her.
Yeah, she shows up in the Garth Ennis run. He again, like as in this is even further along the line, and she's in real rough shape, turning tricks on the street, and he gets her. He does the right thing. A common theme in Constantine is he does the right thing, but everyone around him thinks he's an asshole, and he's kind of an asshole.
He's the asshole with the heart of gold. Yeah. That's a trope in many stories, almost kind of like Wolverine in a way.
But it's like he kind of brings Rachel in, and at the expense of his current girlfriend.
See, I got to go read those issues because you definitely have a leg up on me on the Constantine knowledge. But they go to visit her, and she has been using well, first of all, she's been using tons of heroin, but she's been using the bag of sand to escape from reality, to almost escape from when she can't get her high, or just to escape from how she's let herself completely spiral out of control with her habit. And man, when they go into the house and the walls are just encased in flesh, I thought that was a pretty grotesque scene.
Yeah, that's
within the Sandman volume.
That was definitely one of the grosser bits of this run.
But the end of this issue, I think, is when you start to really see Sandman come into its own as this, okay, we're dealing with something pretty damn good here. This living up to the hype, because it is the emotional touches of this story that really, I think, set it apart, as I'll talk about later, especially when we get to death. But it's clear once they get this bag that she's on death's door, and she's going to die a very painful death of withdrawal. And Constantine pretty much pleads with Morpheus, will you make it easy for her? And she's able to go from this world to the next, to the afterlife, in a very peaceful manner, reflecting on the better days of her relationship with John Constantine. And I'm not just trying to summarize the book here, but I do feel like you kind of got to sit some of this stuff up to have a discussion about it, especially when you're going through the whole volume of the trade here.
A lot happens in this. Like every issue, I feel like this as much as, so many comics nowadays, it almost, if you read a run of it, it all kind of bleeds together. This is very issue by issue.
It's very distinct. Like these could almost be their own little prestige graphic novels or something if they wanted to put them out that way. But let's go to the next issue. Probably the most action-packed, I would say. A Hope in Hell, in which John Constantine has to travel to hell to retrieve his mask from a demon. Kendall, what'd you think of this issue?
So the biggest thing, and I don't know, we're definitely in that Vertigo world, because I was like, oh wait, is Satan actually by three people? Like, is hell actually ruled by three people? And it was, and I was like so happy, because the best John Constantine story is about him making a deal with all three of them. Dangerous Habits.
Isn't that what the movie was based off of? The Keanu Reeves kind of?
Yes, I believe it was. I haven't seen the movie.
Oh wow, it's pretty good.
Yeah, but yes, my understanding is that it is based on
that Dangerous Habits storyline.
Based on Dangerous Habits, yeah.
Yeah. Another thing you see here as we kind of get into this larger DC universe is he's greeted at the gates of hell by Etrigan the Demon, who is a character who shows up many times throughout the DCU, and who is in Justice League Dark. He's a big part of it when they relaunched it for New 52, and that was a hot title for a little bit. Go ahead, Kendall.
Did you see the most recent Justice League Dark DC animated film?
I haven't. I've actually bought it digitally, but I've not watched it yet.
Etrigan is this like drunk comic relief character.
Really?
And it's terrific. And they ask, and he burps, and somebody asks if why he didn't shoot fire, or if he shoots fire out of his mouth usually when he burps, and he says only when I fart.
I gotta watch it. See, the thing is, a lot of those animated things I can watch with my kids, but that's not one of them. so that has been one that's just kind of been sitting there for a while. Whereas my daughter likes the X-Men animated series. We've been working our way through that on Disney Plus. So corny but fun. Man, when you're going to go to hell in one of these books like Constantine or Sandman, I mean, the deepest, darkest place in the entire, cosmic universe, if you will, DC or otherwise, to put that on full display, you're asking a lot. Mm-hmm. I feel that this art captures what you would envision hell to be like, but it's not just fire and brimstone. I think what really was off-putting about me as Etrigan's taking him to Satan is the forest of suicides. I don't know if you remember that line in this as they're going through, and it's really grown quite large since the last time I've been here, which is a reflection of how shitty the state of the world seems to get over time, I guess, as more and more people take their own life, sadly, from this world.
I took it as a correlation between the dream stuff being messed up.
That too. That's a good way to look at it.
I don't know. I feel like they mentioned earlier like some weird stuff with sleepwalking. So my read of that was that there's sleepwalking, but also, I mean, that doesn't mean that it's not also related to a commentary on how the world's gotten messed up, because maybe the whole point is that the world's gotten messed up because we weren't dreaming right or whatever.
Yeah, the cosmic balance is definitely off. So you have the three, and it sounds like you know a lot about this from the Dangerous Habits storyline with Constantine, so I'm going to let you talk about it. But you have Satan, then you have Azazel. Who is the bug-like creature?
Beelzebub?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's been a civil war in hell, apparently, and the result is this rule of three.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that. I don't know that much about beyond that there are sort of three rulers. It's interesting that they have. I feel like they go by different names in the Constantine, but it also is like one of these things where all these like eternal beings go by different names with each other. Because I think one of them is kind of more in charge. But the idea of Dangerous Habits is that he sells his soul to all three of them, and in order to he sells his soul to all three of them when he is terminally ill of cancer. Okay. And so they can't let him die, or else they will, because if one of them gets his soul, then that's an insult to the other two, or it's the other two showing weakness or whatever, and so that will reignite the Civil War.
Interesting.
But deeper than that, I don't have too much understanding. One of them is like the traditional interpretation of like he's the fallen angel, and I don't remember what the other two characters are, what their background is.
So you almost see him do battle in a satanic rock, paper, scissors contest with this over-the-top demon and get his helmet back, which is what we see. What'd you think of the kind of outdoing the miseries here?
Yeah, it was. I thought that was kind of silly. It was kind of like, well, I do this times 1,000,000. Well, I do this times 2,000,000.
But it was kind of entertaining because you're in hell and you're getting this silly game to get this helmet back. So I kind of liked it.
Yeah. No, I liked it fine. It was just kind of a silly little thing. And we're also kind of, I think throughout this run, is they're kind of establishing Morpheus as this like insanely powerful character. So that once he does face other threats in the future, we can kind of look back at all this crazy stuff that he's been able to do, and then, this is an actual challenge for him.
Yeah. And the epilogue of this story, we see that Dr. Destiny is about to get out of Arkham, which takes us to our next issue, which is Passengers, which I love how this starts out, because besides the Arkham stuff and Jonathan Crane, we get to see Mr. Miracle dreaming of his time on Apocalypse, where Granny Goodness is putting him through the escape trials, and he awakes at the Justice League, one of the Justice League International embassies, and he's going to be greeted by Dream, and they're going to kind of put him en route to this amulet, at least the storage of it, because Martian Manhunter knows where it's at.
Yeah.
What'd you think about establishing him really in the DC universe at this point by showing Scarecrow, which is a big Batman villain, and Martian Manhunter and Mr. Miracle?
Right. Yeah, I do like that this is that they made clear this is we are definitely in a DC universe. Also, Mr. Miracle. It's so funny how now that I know who Mr. Miracle is because of Tom King's series, he seems to pop up everywhere. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, he has definitely gotten a lot more prevalent, but this is way before that. So this is almost coincidental. I mean like when I'm watching old stuff, like like I was watching Justice League Unlimited, like random episode of Justice League Unlimited, and he popped up, and just like I think it's because like he actually has been in stuff over the years, but he's like generally like in this case even he was kind of like you could probably put just about anybody in that role and do 4 panels on his origin. Yeah. Absolutely. You just didn't notice it in the past. You're much more aware of that character after that great Tom King run. They just released the Absolute Fourth World Volume 1. I really want to pick up that hardcover, but it's like $120 and I bought too much stuff because I've never read the Fourth World Jack Kirby stuff, and I really want to read it because even though it's like Silver Age stuff, it's supposed to be some great stuff out there.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I haven't read that stuff either. It's good. I'm glad that it's also like I'm glad that I know who Granny Goodness is, and it is nice. I mean, that's like kind of true throughout this run. I think part of the reason that I didn't remember a lot of it was that I felt like there were a lot of tier 2 DC characters that I didn't care about were the DC characters that showed up, and so now with a lot more knowledge of the DC universe, seeing these recognizable characters helps.
It's a much richer experience.
It helps ground the story. It gives me something to latch onto. It's just like what I was saying about Macbeth, having Patrick Stewart as playing Macbeth. That gives you, at least you've got somebody on screen that you recognize, and just something to, it gives you something to latch onto.
And what you have here is a race to get this amulet, and it's cool because while Dr. Destiny has basically taken someone hostage as a hitchhiker to get him to the amulet, you have Dream literally riding dreams to get there. And I thought that was a great panel when he was riding through the dreams, one of which was a dog dreaming. So I just found that very, very interesting. He gets to the amulet. Then he is immediately attacked by Dr. Destiny, who gets the amulet, and that gets us to 24 hours, which sets up kind of how heinous of a villain this Dr. Destiny guy is going to be. The best way I could sum this up, Kendall, is he puts these people through living hell in this diner for 24 hours.
Yeah.
These are not some good people, and he brings their flaws out to the forefront. And it ends up basically him getting bored and having them do all kinds of things to each other, eventually killing each other. And this is really all about him and establishing him here.
Yeah. I thought this was a really good, completely self-contained issue. I liked the waitress that she married off the lesbians in her little writing, and she was like, "Oh, one day I'm gonna send all my stories to Dear Abby, and then I'm going to get published, and everybody's going to think what an amazing best-selling author you are, and they're going to be like, well, how do you know what it's like to be a waitress if you're a writer?" Like, that
was clever. Everything with her was really good. You know what else I found interesting about this issue is the executive guy looks very Trumpian. Very Trumpian, and maybe that's just me noticing it because I'm so sick of Trump now, but not out of the realm of possibility that this guy was modeled after Donald Trump even at this time. Yeah, he was a terrible human being back then too.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen. I always bring up the unauthorized biography of Lex Luthor. Have you ever seen that cover?
No.
Let's see if I'm gonna pull it up for you real fast.
I'm gonna Google it real quick. Unauthorized bio of Lex Luthor.
From 1989.
Oh yeah, I see it. He looks very Trumpian.
Yes, that is, and then Google the cover of the Art of the Deal.
Okay. Which one came first? Was it the Lex Luthor biography first?
No, the Art of the Deal came first. That cover is a direct takeoff on a direct parody of the Art of the Deal by Donald Trump.
And it's the most unflattering depiction of Lex Luthor that I've seen. So
yeah, it's well. First of all, if you've never read it, it's really good. It's like it's very. I
need to read it.
It's tonally very similar to Citizen Kane, where there's like the main character is or the point of view character is a journalist kind of trying to write a biography on Lex Luthor, and obvious stuff happens with that. But
speaking of Citizen Kane, check out the Kendallcast on that.
Right,
episode you guys did.
Yes, we did the movie roundtable. We did Citizen Kane as our first one. That was also speaking of Citizen Kane, check out Citizen Kane. It's a pretty good movie.
Yeah, one of the greatest movies of all time, I hear. So this ends with all kinds of horrible stuff happen to these patrons of this diner. You get to the next issue, Sound and Fury, and you see that stuff is not just contained to the diner, it's spread all across Earth, it looks like. And now Morpheus has regained consciousness, and he's going to confront him in this diner. And this is where you see that it's about to hit the fan once Morpheus pulls that mask on. And he says, we're not going to have this battle here for this amulet. This is going to take place in Dream World. Yep. And I think they have a pretty epic battle for this amulet here. Some trippy stuff going on.
And, of course, Sound and Fury is the final Macbeth reference from the Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow soliloquy that Macbeth says. He's talking. He says, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
The Macbeth stuff, I'm so glad that I did this podcast with you, because I would have had no idea. The Macbeth stuff would have completely went over my head. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, we'll just have to be. I think I got lucky that I recognized the Weird Sisters as something, because that's what it was. Like I was like, the Weird Sisters is a thing, and I Googled it, and that's how I got it. So we'll just have to really be on the lookout for some of these literary references or Shakespeare references. Like I said, I think one of the later volumes, the whole thing is based on A Midsummer Night's Dream, but we'll have to watch out for that.
You really see the power of Sandman on display, or Morpheus, in this issue. As the battle's coming to a close, there's this giant version of him holding Dr. Destiny in the palm of his hand. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow, this Dr. Destiny has been outclassed and outmatched in every way here. And it concludes with the amulet. As we found out in the next issue, it has actually been destroyed, but the power has been infused into Sandman. Right. So now he has all the MacGuffins back. He has the bag of sand, the helmet, and the amulet's power within him now. What do you think of the helmet's design? I meant to ask that earlier because I had seen it before, and I'd never really realized what it was. Just in other stuff in DC, and maybe an Easter egg here or there. I think it's pretty damn cool.
It's a really interesting design. I don't know. It's weird. A lot of this stuff is just, it's interesting and weird.
That's your review of Sandman, guys. Podcast over. It's interesting and weird. You heard it here.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how that's kind of what it comes down to. Is that's just another thing that's kind of interesting and weird. I will say on this read, I just kind of enjoyed him gathering all the things. Where I think on previous reads, I was kind of annoyed that it took the whole 6 issues for him to get everything. For it's that origin story issue where you see the movie and it's like, finally I get to see him in costume for 45 seconds.
Yeah, and then he'll take his mask off, which he does. Yeah, which happens in the damn superhero movies all the time. Yep. But I read through this whole thing and I get to this last issue, The Sound of Her Wings, where he meets up with his sister for the very first time in this story, Death. And I'm thinking, man, this has been a great story. But it wasn't until I completed this issue, which seemed a little shorter to me, at least maybe it was just the content, I just flew through it, than previous issues, that it dawned up on me that this is going to live up to the hype. This has an emotional resonance more than a lot of stuff you can read within the comics medium, especially Big Two. I get that this is DC, but it's really not, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's Vertigo, and you can't really judge it within the context of Big Two storytelling. What do you think about it? Is that a fair statement?
So DC got rid of Vertigo a year or two ago, and they said it was because their main line, the type of stories that they would have to tell in Vertigo in the past, they could now tell in the main line. Of course, coincidentally, then DC started the Black Label line, which is basically what I would say is a lot closer to what Vertigo is doing.
And they rebranded a lot of the old Vertigo stuff Black Label, didn't they?
Right. Yeah. Well, sort of. I mean, there's a Constantine Black Label book, but there's also a Constantine in the DC universe. I think sometimes there's Joker stuff that's Black Label and Joker stuff that's not Black Label. I don't know that the Sandman stuff right now is. I'm not sure what that falls under. If that's Sandman universe, because there's also a Sandman universe line right now, but I don't know if that counts as Black Label. I don't know. But I think that the thing to consider is, I mean, I'm not a comic book historian, but
you're not.
But no, I would consider myself a comic book critic. I wouldn't consider myself a comic book historian. Yeah. Because if it happened before 2006, I'm much less likely to know a ton about it. Certainly if it happened before about 1990. But if you look at comics in the 70s, there were controversial comics, but you had the Comics Code. Comics were for kids. And then in the 80s with people like Frank Miller and Alan Moore, and then once kind of Vertigo became a thing, that's when you started having more mature writing. And I think part of the reason that Sandman is held up, is so highly regarded, does have to do with it being one of those relatively early titles. It was still, even though it was 89, it was still 80s Vertigo, which is kind of a big deal. And also things that may not be. Things were very edgy back then that may not have been considered quite as edgy, which I think actually helps it, because some of the stuff from the mid 90s is like, maybe you could tone that down a little bit. I don't need to see, I don't need to see all that stuff. But this last issue, I agree, it was just excellent. I love, because do you read monthly comics, or are you just trades now?
I'm just trades. I did monthly comics forever, much like you, and I actually sold off my collection, and I've been putting that toward mainly omnibuses and deluxe hardcovers, but I still buy trade paperbacks.
Got your $15 a long box.
I actually sold 6 long boxes for $300.
Oh,
and there were. Go ahead.
That's really good, because I know how much. No. I know how much retailers pay for that stuff. Yeah, it's literally 15 to 25 for.
There was some good stuff in there, man, and I kind of sold him on there was the complete Hush, there was the complete Long Halloween signed by Tim Sale. There was a second printing of the first Miles Morales. Okay. There was the first Riri Williams in there, so that box was definitely well over. If he was just selling those issues, he would get well over 300 on eBay. I did keep one issue. I kept I have the first appearance of Spider-Gwen. So I pulled that one out of there. So that's the only single issue comic I have.
Wow. I have, so I paid attention to how much the first Spider-Gwen was after Spider-Verse came out. I looked at eBay sold listings. The week that it came out, I may be off on these numbers because it's been a while. The week that Spider-Verse came out, Spider-Gwen sold or Edge of Spider-Verse #2 sold for like $300. And like 2 weeks later, it was $100, and then like a week after that, it was $50, and then it leveled out. I think it's at like $35 now or something, or I mean, I don't know where it's at now, but
the last time I looked it up, it was going 80 to 150.
80 to 100. Yeah, that would make sense, especially if it's relatively recently, because everything's gone up in value since the quarantine. But it was just really funny because it was like orders of magnitude less value over those couple weeks, and that's how that stuff works. But it
was my 29th birthday. My wife surprised me with that, and we went and we got it signed by the guys who wrote it. I can't remember the guy who wrote that issue. He's from Charlotte. He wrote what is the Southern Bastards comic? I can't remember the guy's name.
Or Jason Latour. It's Jason Latour, right?
Latour, yeah, Jason Latour.
Yeah,
That's who it is.
I should have known that, because Jason Latour wrote the ongoing after that. But my point was, when you read monthly books and you get your pile of 4 to 6 books every week, you read through them, and it's mostly chapter 4 of 7. You're just kind of trying to get through it. It's good. It's a good overall experience, but it's also kind of a grind or whatever. When I read an issue like The Sound of Her Wings, like this last issue, that's completely self-contained, tells a really compelling, really interesting story, has some emotional resonance, kind of says something about life, just this great storytelling of, the guy asks for her number and she says, well, I'll be seeing you soon. So he's going to die by the end of the issue. It's just a really well-crafted comic. And that's just like, especially because, I was admittedly kind of rushing through this read because we were
doing this show.
Doing the show. I was 8:00 this morning, and I had 3 issues left, and just needed to get through it.
You slowed down here, didn't you?
Yeah. I kind of slowed down. I was able to. I don't even know that I slowed down, but I was just able to enjoy it a little bit more than especially the 2 issues prior, which were definitely this is the setup for the. This is the setup for the ending, and I know how it's going to end because the book's called Sandman. It's not called Dr. Destiny.
Yeah.
Thank
God, that would be a very dark book.
Yeah.
Darker.
Well, unless it was like Superior Spider-Man where he kills Sandman and then gets some of Sandman and then takes up the mantle of Sandman or something.
Now we're writing Sandman fanfic, but this is one of the best single issue comics I've ever read. Mm-hmm. I'll say that. And I don't know if I've read as much as you, but I have read a crap ton. I got into comics heavy after Batman Begins came out. Uh-huh. And so it was about 2 years before, around the time House of M came out, I dipped my toes in the water, so I was familiar with it and stuff. But then when around that same time Batman Begins came out, I was collecting single issues on and off, but especially Spider-Man and Batman from then until I had kids. Mm-hmm. And one of my other favorite single issues in Big 2, speaking of Civil War, is Civil War: The Confession. That discussion that basically Iron Man's having with Cap's dead body. Uh-huh. And it's those type of single issues that deal with heavy subject matter in an adult and mature but an overly emotional way that kind of stick with you. When I put down this comic, I was really like gobsmacked of how good that last issue was. Like the issues before that, they were good to great. This was like a 5 out of 5, as I would say on my old podcast, Confirmed Epic, man. Like the scene, because what's interesting about Death here, she is her job. She's basically the Grim Reaper, right? It's her job to herald these people to the afterlife. But as she takes it as a job, it almost seems nonchalant, like her brother's tagging her along with her at a day at the office, right? but it also never feels like she's taken her job lightly. And I think that was such a fine line to balance. And just the different people, from the middle-aged comedian to the older guy to the baby who dies of SIDS, you know, having a 5-month-old baby right now. Yeah. Man, did that really just... It made me want to cry, man. It really freaking did, because they're so... I know you don't have kids, but they're so delicate at that age, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, life is delicate at any point, which I think is what this shows, with the young and virile guy getting killed at the end, who was hitting on her earlier in the book, which I just thought was pretty damn powerful, man. The pause that you have as they wait for the wings, and you know, you can just... It's almost like, as the reader, you pause, right? As you're reading it, to see if that's going to happen. And I just thought that was some of the most beautiful moments I've ever read in a comic, man. Like, did you read this issue back when you read it the first time? I guess it just didn't hit you that hard then.
I mean, yes, I did. I'm sure that I did. And I mean, I don't even know that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't hit me. You know, I was like 19. Who cares about
exactly.
that? Right?
Yeah. That's true. It's a much different experience, I'm sure, reading this at 19, 18 years old versus now that we're old men now, but we've got a lot more life experience. But I also think
that like what you said, it is matter of fact, like this is just a day on the job. Well, also you can tell that it does affect her. There's a subtlety to that I think I did not catch on previous readings. And so because of that, like, just the idea of having a sexy lady as death is not, you know, that's not the most original thought in the world.
No.
But just the little bit that you get with this character, the amount of character depth that you see, you know, stuff like where she says, well, why didn't you ask for my help? You didn't realize that I was maybe worried about you, you know, like that just really, it was like, oh, this is a real person.
The first guy, man, that first guy who looks like, you know, he's an older guy, he's lived a long time. Mm-hmm. He's a heavyset guy here. And so now I'm dead. Now what? She's like, now's when you find out, Harry. And it's like she draws him close. From the darkness, I hear the beating of mighty wings. And then she's like, I thought he was sweet, didn't you? So just in that little bit of dialogue, she genuinely cares about these people, especially when they're good. And she's probably taken millions of people, herald them to the afterlife.
I liked that the old guy, that he could kind of see her before he died.
Yeah. God, that was, because when you hear stories about people talking about being in the room with people who have passed, like grandparents, and you hear that kind of stuff, you know, and there's no doubt that Neil Gaiman was drawing on that kind of stuff when writing these issues, man. But what do you think, man? Preludes and Nocturnes, did it live up to the hype? Did it make you want to keep reading?
It definitely made me want to keep reading. I think that it was, I mean, unfortunately, I'm old now. And so nothing can get me as excited as I can't be as excited about a comic book as a 19-year-old from 2007.
That's sad, ain't it? I know exactly what you mean. You know, are you 32?
Yeah, I'm 32.
And I'm 33.
33 here in a little bit. In 4 months. But like, it's not going to be this. Sandman is probably never going to be one of my favorite, or one of my essential comics or whatever, at least until I get through the whole run. If I read all 12 volumes, then, you know, there's only so many comics that I've read 72 issues of, or however many issues there are.
I think it's 77.
Yeah. There's not that many comics that I've read 77 issues of. So, you know, it could get up there if it's consistent all the way through. And that's the other thing, is if it's consistent all the way through. But it was definitely a very strong first volume, it was definitely a refreshing read. One of the I would say it lives up to the hype, especially compared to some of the other stuff that I've read that hasn't lived up to the hype recently, let's say.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. This is not when I started. It's like, okay, I'm not seeing what all the hype's about, but after I got through that Sound of Her Wings issue, I realized we're going to be in for quite a ride, and I can't wait to see where Death and Morpheus end up over the course of this journey. And next on our journey, we'll be covering Volume 2 next month, which is The Dollhouse. I know you got that on Comixology on sale. I got it coming from Amazon tomorrow, so can't wait to read that and discuss the issues within that trade with you. Kendall, is there anything you want to say before we close it out this first episode of Sleeping on Sandman?
Nope. Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully we'll keep this up and get some and make something cool out of this.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Is there anything you want to plug, your other shows or anything?
Considering we're not going to post this for a few months, hopefully I still have shows. I always hate it when people record podcasts way in advance and then they plug a show that they haven't updated in 4 months. So let's just say go to Kendallcast.ninja and check out everything that I do there.
Okay, awesome. As for me, check out the Tour of the DC Universe podcast. Even by the time of this, not just recording, but when this post in October, we're still going to be working our way through Crisis on Infinite Earths because we're going through that 3 issues at a time. So check that out. It's on Twitter at DCU TourPod, and it's pretty much everywhere at DCU TourPod. Thank you so much for tuning in to the very first episode of Sleeping on Sandman. And until then, sweet dreams, everyone.
Kendallcast.ninja, celebrating media, hobbies, and passion since 2014.